Very much looking forward to this conversation with my next guest. In particular, when we look at the latest census statistics in New Zealand, fewer New Zealanders than ever are saying that they are religious, let alone Christian. So we have the reality of a shrinking church in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So perhaps it's timely that we're speaking with Nick Klinkenberg. He's the founder of Vision Churches International. It's described as one of New Zealand's great outreaching practitioners, and he's had success with overseas church plants, especially in Europe. He joins us on the program today to talk about particularly his new book. Nick, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Andrew. Great to be with you.
So the brief version, what's led you to where you are today?
Well, I've always been planting churches. It's been a bit of a passion for mine for many years. We moved to Europe 2010, sorry, and I wanted to plant churches in Europe, and I could see very quickly we had to change the model because
I just got to say, I mean, Europe may be where they used to do churches back in the Middle Ages, but it's a tough place to plant churches now, right?
It's very tough, and it's quite slow, but we're getting there slowly. But what was fascinating was Europe's made up of villages and towns.
Yep.
And if we are not, if we're thinking of planting a church with a building, lots of money, huge attendance numbers, it's not going to work as fast as I'd like. And I'm thinking multiplication. I'm thinking of discipleship, and I'm thinking of multiplication and touching communities and nations. And yeah, we could plant a church, maybe 15, 20 years time, we plant another church, but I think there's got to be a better way. So I've started to change the way I've thought of planting churches for the last 12, 14 years.
Now, we're looking at your book, which appropriately called How to Multiply Churches. I mean, firstly, I've got to ask the question, what's with the book? I got very confused when I first picked up a copy of your book. It's backwards and it's forward and it's upside down, but you've done this on purpose, of course.
Yes, I have. And if you read the very first page, you can see why. We need to think differently. Yep. And that's why I wrote the book. We need to think differently. And I wanted to make it small because it's not complicated. I don't say it's easy, but it's not complicated. Yep. And I think we've complicated Christianity, actually, and I think we've complicated church. So I just wanted to make it small, very small copy, and also I wrote it backwards. Yeah. So the publisher rang me and said, look, do you really want to do this backwards, Nick? I said, yep. Yeah, I said, why is that? And he was a very nice man, and he didn't want to say that it was really terrible. But he said, well, I said, it's awkward, isn't it? It's horrible. It's frustrating. He said, yes, all the above. I said, yeah, well, that's exactly why I wrote it backwards. So we just need to be reminded we need to think differently.
Exactly. And all of that frustration and thinking outside of the box, the book forces you to do that. Reminds me of reading, I don't know if you've read Japanese manga, but that's, again, it's back to front and it takes a while to get your head around it. Some people would say, though, Nick, there is already a book on planting churches. It's called the Book of Acts. And in some ways, a lot of the ideas that you're talking about in your book are similar to the church in the first century. Perhaps no surprises there.
No, there's no surprises. And I've come back to that over the last 12, 14 years, more so. It's fascinating. The statistics that we can find to date is about 100 AD. There were about 25,000 Christians worldwide, so 100 AD. Yep. This is from Alan Hirsch, his stats. And by 310, there was something like 20 million.
Wow.
So, they didn't have the Bible as we know it. They didn't have my book, surprisingly. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no email. The roads weren't, really, there were tracks, no push bikes, no cars, no planes, and yet they multiplied. No buildings, hardly any buildings. And, not huge amounts of cash, and they're under persecution. Yep. So how did they do that? And when you look at the book of Acts, you can see, they had a passion for Jesus, and they just discipled one another, discipled people.
Nick, have we been doing it wrong, or have we just not been doing it, in your opinion?
I don't know if we've been doing it wrong. I just think we've been focused on perhaps I think we've been focused on, not discipleship. Let me put it that way.
Yep.
I don't know if we've really, Jesus, said in Matthew 28, of course, which we all know, go make disciples of the nations. And
Yep.
discipleship is a one-on-one, one-on-two deal. And I don't think we're doing what Jesus really wanted us to do. Now, if I'd heard myself say that 20 years ago, I probably would have reacted quite strongly. And I thought if people come to a service, if they come to a small group or lead a small group and they serve in the church, well, they're being discipled. No, that's the result of discipleship. It's not discipleship. And I think, I'm surprised that I even thought that way. And I think we morph. I think we grow. I think we change as we get older, and
Yep.
and we learn a few things, which is good.
Wisdom along the way. I mean, for some churches in New Zealand, they'll think, oh, isn't it fantastic? We've got all these new couples moving to the area. We've got new people coming to our church. But honestly, they're coming to our church because they left somebody else's church. That's not really church growth, is it?
No, and unfortunately, I'm picking up in America, for example, the way we were planning churches is put marketing plan in place and a strategic plan and a pre-launch and advertising it like crazy. It doesn't seem that the figures Christian-wise are going up. In fact, they're going the opposite way.
Yep.
And so I think people are coming from other churches. It's not healthy, and it's just taking from one church into another. So I think when we're talking, what I'm talking about is we need to start with discipleship, which is tough. It's not easy. It's not complicated, but it's not easy. And it's not sexy, unless I'm doing it, of course.
I was going to drop the S word myself, actually, because bringing sexy back, because when you're talking marketing, when you're talking, well, our church has got to be better. It's got to have a better youth program. It's got to have a bigger video wall than this other church. If we're going to attract people into our little kingdom that we're building in the corner of our town, then that actually discipleship, a little bit of hard work, some Bible study, accountability, this is how we grow the church. It does seem counterintuitive, Nick.
It does. And I think, I have to say from the, right up the front, that I just believe in the body of Christ. I really do, whether it's mega, macro, but we haven't talked about micro. We haven't talked about small.
Yep.
And I say small is the new big. You can multiply with small. We can multiply elephants, which is 1 to 3 elephant, or 2 to 3 elephants in 3 years.
Yeah.
Or we can think about rabbits, which is 476 million in 3 years. So I think we need both.
Yeah.
But we've never talked about micro, certainly in the West. And I look, the figures are going down in New Zealand, the figures are going down in Australia and in America.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing ministers around, all those countries are beginning to realize that we've got to do something different, which is starting to happen, it's fascinating. I've never seen it in the 50 years of ministry activity that I've been involved in.
Wow.
In New Zealand like this. So it's quite fascinating.
That's certainly good news, because some people might think, oh gosh, we're fighting a losing battle. This is a planned retreat in this regard. But I mean, this isn't just a book that you've written. This is things that you've put into place in your practice in Europe in particular. These strategies work. Micro church, I suppose, allows us to grow deep in relationship with a core group of people.
Yeah.
That's the way Paul and Peter did it, and it still works today.
It does. And, the fact is, how big is a church? In the Jewish mindset, you had to have 10 men, 13 years and over.
Okay.
If you're going to have a proper legal synagogue meeting. It still happens today.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's true that in Holland, I've got a friend who works with Jewish folks, and he said, look, Nick, it happens today. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if there are only 8 men 13 years and over, they will get 2 extra Jewish men, unbelievers, come to the synagogue so they can have their meeting.
Oh, okay.
Jesus comes along and he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there am I in the midst. So I say, how big can a church be? Well, we've always said, it needs to be this size or whatever. Well, how about 2 or 3 now? It shouldn't stay 2 or 3, of course.
Yep.
If you're focused on the word and worship and community and mission, which is a huge thing. But it can start there. And he doesn't agerize it. He doesn't genderize it. He just says, we're 2 or 3. There am I in the midst. He kind of smashes it out of the water with that background that I just said. You know?
I love your rabbit metaphor as well, because when we think growth, we think, oh, it's got to be really big. It's got to be so enormous. But actually, no, lots of small ones is how the multiplication strategy works, rather than one big, enormous one to rule them all, as it were.
Yeah. And small is the new big, I say. Small can multiply much more easily. And it just doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take hardly any money to plant a church.
Loving this little book, which helps us to look at things from a different perspective, literally with the book as well. These are strategies. They're in the Bible, so they probably work. In fact, you've seen them work in Europe. You're convinced they'll work in New Zealand as well, Nick?
Absolutely. It's happening. It's happening in New Zealand, in different places in New Zealand. And what I'm finding is people are not reacting to the, church as we know it, but they're responding to mission, which is fascinating to me. As I've said before, I've never seen this in 50 years of ministry. So they're responding. They're not anti. They're just moved away from a church they've led. A number of them have moved away from a church they've led, and they're engaging in this in this whole micro church thing, and it's working. It really is. It's fascinating.
And God is doing some good things through it. And Nick, if people wanted to get hold of you, find out more about your ministry, get a hold of a copy of this exciting but confusing little book, what's the best way of doing that?
Oh, just go on the website, visionchurches.com.
Nick, thank you so much for what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.